Our first speaker tonight is a longtime Meteor Night favorite, Ben Newman, who's the technical lead for the Meteor Framework from Meteor Development Group, who happens to be in town from Brooklyn, not New York, Brooklyn, New York. Ben will be speaking about upgrading to the latest version of Node, why should you do it now, and how to do it. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks. Thanks for coming out. It's good to see some familiar faces and some new people. I'm Ben, Benjamin without the I on most kinds of social media. I've been at Meteor like a year and a half now, and the whole time I've been working remotely from New York, and that works really well. It's not the first company I've worked remotely for, so I know that when I say it works well here, it actually does work. My entire team is completely distributed. I've got someone who lives in Australia who's going to be talking tonight. Tom Zoll lives here in San Francisco. I'm in New York. Before that, we had someone who lived in Israel and someone who lived in Amsterdam. So that's one nice thing about working remotely, is that everyone else is doing it too. As Mark mentioned, I work on the Meteor Framework. I'm the tech lead for that, and we recently hit the milestone of shipping version 1.3 of Meteor, as you have probably heard, which included a module system and lots of other improvements around testing. When that shipped, my small contribution to the marketing effort was this tweet. And I decided to call out a pair of sort of lesser known and likely to be overlooked features from the release. These are by no means the banner features, but I really do mean it when I say that Meteor Node and Meteor NPM, which you may or may not have heard of, are a couple of my favorite parts of the release. So I wanted to spend a moment just explaining how that works. The background is that since its beginnings, Meteor has shipped with a version of Node, the JavaScript runtime. And that's strange compared to most of the rest of the JavaScript ecosystem, because you're usually supposed to bring your own version of Node, and hopefully the packages that you're using are all compatible with it. And it's your problem if they're not. So let's see, I can make this a little bigger. Everyone see that? It says Meteor. Yeah? OK, so Node is a command that puts you into a REPL, as you know. Meteor Node is no different. In fact, yeah, it's in my history. Great. So on the face of it, that's not much different. Maybe a little worse, because you have to type Meteor 2 in addition to Node. But the benefit of it is that you know that whenever you type Meteor Node, you're always using the version of Node that is coming with Meteor instead of a version of Node that might be installed elsewhere on your system. And to go along with that, we have Meteor NPM. Meteor NPM version will spit out a little JSON blob of all the versions of all the things that matter about your development environment. So you can see here that it's using the 5.11.0 version of Node, which has not yet been released. That's what I'm going to be talking about tonight. It's using a more recent version of the V8 embedding API than actually ships with Meteor right now. But that's all in agreement with what Meteor Node would give you. So if you've ever been working with a Meteor app and needed to use Node or NPM, this is just an easy way of doing that, right? But this one small feature got me thinking, what the future of Meteor, where potentially there are different versions of Node in play, might look like. And reminded me that this thread, some of you may have seen, a very long, very active thread on the Meteor repository. all about upgrading Node, this is a popular thread by the standards of the Meteor repository. It's popular by almost any standard. There's so many messages. It's even gotten to the point where someone who doesn't work for Meteor commented scolding other people for just commenting with +1 comments, asking them to make substantive remarks instead. I don't feel the same way. The +1s are great. It's nice to know that people care about this, even if they have nothing to add. Speaking of people who have something to add and then some, perhaps my favorite comment on this thread is from Nathan Muir, who went to the trouble of trying to upgrade the version of Node that Meteor uses himself and cataloged every roadblock that he ran into. The list of things here is encouragingly short, but these are all still would be stumbling blocks if you were going to attempt this on your own. Credit also goes, I think, to this Luke Adams person who used a more recent version of Node 5. Nathan used 4. And managed to generate the Dev Bundle, which is a bundle of all the things that we ship with Meteor using that version of Node, and got an app to run, and noted that there were some problems with the Meteor Promise implementation. So this kind of contribution to a thread like this, that's full of people who are just really enthusiastic, but not a whole lot of actual progress is really nice to see. And so once I got a break from the 1.3 release process, I decided to go ahead and make a couple pull requests. And I'll get to that in a second. But I want to spend a second explaining what it is that Luke Adams did here. So when you run Meteor, you probably are running it from, that's me, that's weird. You're probably running it from a version of Meteor that was installed using curl, right? Or maybe you're on Windows and you use the Windows installer. Well, there's another way to run Meteor, which is to clone the repository, and then, if necessary, generate your own dev bundle, and then run Meteor using the Meteor script that's in the root of the repository, using a relative path rather than just the word Meteor on the command line. And you'll find that experience is very similar to using Meteor from a released version, but it allows you to much more easily make changes to the implementation of the command line tool and test them out quickly. So this generate dev bundle script looks like this. Oh, wow, that definitely needs to be a bit bigger. Right, and it's doing things like downloading Node and Mongo, and then npm installing a bunch of things, and then at the very bottom, tarring it all up into a bundle that can be stored on S3 so that other people don't have to build the dev bundle. They can just download it and extract it in place. So what does that look like? Well, I already have a dev bundle here in my checkout. That's what the contents look like. The dev bundle Ben node is the same as Meteor node. But I'm going to delete that now. So I hope this next step works. I'm going to regenerate the dev bundle. And on my machine, this takes like 3 or 4 minutes. So I'm just going to let it go. It downloaded Node. Now it's downloading Mongo. And it's off to the races. So let's get back to the presentation. And oof. Is that readable? OK. So the other day, when I got sick and tired of us not having an answer to this very long GitHub issue thread about upgrading Node, I went ahead and pushed some work-in-progress changes that I made to enable using different versions of Node. And I wasn't entirely sure whether that was going to mean upgrading to Node 4 or Node 5 or Node 6. So I published 3 different pull requests. Now, technically, we can't merge all three of these, because which version of Node would we be using then? And so that's not the goal. The goal would be to hopefully identify one of these as the best choice. And my hope, honestly, is that it is Node 6. Now, that said, Node 6 was released 2 days ago, right? So there just hasn't been much time for NPM packages that don't quite work with it, like SQLite 3, to update. But that's a problem that the entire community is facing right now. So I'm pretty confident that, give it a week or 2 weeks, those people will have fixed their packages, and Node 6 will be about as stable as Node 5, and it'll be a much easier decision which of those versions we want to upgrade to. Right, so here's a graphical representation of the plan that the Node.js Foundation has for its LTS, or long-term support releases, and its simultaneous current releases. So you can see that since October 2015, Node 4 has been in this blue region, actively supported in a long-term way, and it's going to continue to be supported until April 2017. So it's not crazy to contemplate upgrading to Node 4. But when there are 2 newer versions of Node out there, that would seem like not quite catching up to the times, I think. On the other hand, Node 5, and this is by design, the odd versions of Node are typically experimental, and the even ones are meant to be long-term supported. So Node 5 has only been available since October 2015, and it's not even any longer the current version. Node 6 has taken over that, and Node 5 doesn't have a future after somewhere between April and October of this year. So upgrading to Node 5 is probably not realistic. So while Node 6 is pretty new and isn't going to actually be under long-term support until October, there's going to be a really long period in which that is the most stable and well-supported version of Node through April 2018 at least, at which point we'll probably switch to Node 8. So my money is on Node 6, but I've gotten Meteor to work using Node 4 and Node 5 so far, and not Node 6. So that's the truth of the matter. Great. So if we check on our dev bundle, great, I can see that it finished successfully, and indeed, if I run a command like meteor help, which doesn't really do anything, but it does require a dev bundle, you can see that it's going to go, usually it would go download the dev bundle, but here it found the dev bundle sitting there since we just built it and went ahead and extracted it. And so you can see that Meteor Node works, same as it used to. Okay. Right, so that's promising. At least we can run Meteor using a more recent version of Node, and we can even create apps with it and run those apps, which to me was a huge relief when I first got to this point, because it meant that there were no immediate showstoppers preventing this from succeeding. And the fact that Node 5 worked just about as well as Node 4 was also really encouraging. So all of this build process is running in Node 5, right? So that's tons and tons of code in the Meteor code base that's running with really no problem at all. And indeed, the app loads. How would I prove this to you? Do you know about Meteor Shell? It's pretty cool. It's a Node client that connects to your running app, so you can see things like is server true. Cool. So that's all working, and that's hugely encouraging for me. But there's still a lot of work to do. And this is part of the reason that I open those pull requests, because my hope is that as people try out the pull requests, check out the branches, build their own dev bundles, and try to use that to experiment with building apps, they will run into problems that are due to the upgrade and report them as issues or submit pull requests against those branches. There is a fairly exhaustive list of notable changes just between 5 and 6, and likewise between 4 and 5. And, well, does anyone know what version of Node Meteor uses right now? What we ship with? Yeah, 0.10.43. So there's been a 0.11, a 0.12, a couple versions of IO.js before the heroic merger of IO.js and Node, and then there was a 4, 5, and 6 version of that. So we're a couple of major versions behind, to say the least. And I'm not proud of that, but this is the plan to fix it. So, to some extent, this work will involve looking at this list and auditing the Meteor code base and making sure that, if we use buffer.prototype.lastIndexOf, we're using it correctly in the new style. But just as an existence proof, being able to create an app and run it using Node 5 suggests that not all of these are immediately blockers. And we've already started doing some of the work to address these things. I'm the person in the yellow shirt here. These are commits on a branch called WIP for work in progress -upgrade -node. And I'm going to highlight a couple of them that I think are interesting. So the first idea that I would like to dispel, Meteor uses a library called NodeFibers, and this enables coroutines, which are a really powerful language abstraction for Node. And that's been sort of a weird Meteor thing for a long time, but it serves us well. And since it is a native module that needs to be recompiled against each new version of Node, you might worry that new versions of Node would just do something that breaks compatibility with fibers, and Meteor would have to find a totally different solution for that use case. But in fact, upgrading to Node 5 meant that we were able to get rid of our Windows fork of fibers and upgrade to the same version of fibers, 1.0.10, on all platforms. So this was actually just an unqualified success. Fibers compile just fine against all the major versions of Node, and so we're going to keep using them. That's a relief. Another thing we're doing now, that we're able to do now, is download Node binaries directly from npmjs.org instead of pre-built binaries that we built and stored on Amazon S3. So that cleans up the generate dev bundle script quite a bit. Luke Adams pointed out a promise with the Meteor promise, a problem with the Meteor promise package, and I fixed that. And this one is really interesting. So there are a lot of packages on our package system atmosphere, and only a minority of them have binary NPM dependencies. But the ones that do have binary dependencies face a real problem as we upgrade Node, because we've been asking Meteor package authors to run publish for Arch on 3 different architectures, or 4 different architectures: Mac 64-bit, Linux 32 and 64-bit, and Windows 32-bit. But the sort of dark secret is that each of those architectures is only Node 0.10, right? So all that code in Atmosphere is not compiled for newer versions of Node, right? So we could either ask Meteor package authors to go and run publish for Arch, not only on those 4 platforms, but across several versions of Node, or we could push a little bit of the compilation effort onto the person doing the installing, right? So this is a step away from the Meteor philosophy of making things as easy as possible for the end user developer. But we're still in a position, I think, to make this somewhat increased level of effort pretty manageable. So how are we going to do that? let me first show you what this means. So if I add an Atmosphere package like npm bcrypt, or actually a better example is accounts password, which depends on npm bcrypt, then you'll see it download. Oh no. OK. There's a known problem.
Password, singular, just password.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. All right, so you may have seen it download npm bcrypt there. And now what you're seeing, or what you saw up there with the CXX and the where did it go? OK. Anyway, it recompiled it just after we added that package to the app. And I actually turned on the output. It normally only shows you the output if it fails. So normally it would be totally invisible that that was happening behind the scenes. So that's pretty cool. What it means is that you potentially don't even have to publish on different architectures as a Meteor package author. You can just rely on people adding the package to their app to do the recompilation with whatever version of Node they want to use, and whatever platform they're on. So if that works, if the hunch that it's not too much to ask people to compile packages when they download them, which is the name of the game in the larger NPM world, for what it's worth, then we'll be in a great position when it comes to using Meteor on not just the leading platforms like Linux, Mac, and Windows, but say Raspberry Pis, ARM, other ARM platforms, any version of Node. I don't know. If that excites you, then I'm glad it excites me. I would love to be able to run Meteor on a Raspberry Pi. OK, so how does this work? Well, thankfully, most NPM packages that have binary dependencies use a tool called Nodejs, which is a nice way of interacting with the V8 embedding API. And Nodejs is great when you get it fully set up. But the installation is actually pretty annoying relative to what Meteor users may expect. So at the very least, on every platform, you need a version of Python installed, 2.7. Definitely not version 3. You need a compiler tool chain. You need the make command on Mac. You need the Xcode command line tools. And on Windows, depending on which version of Windows you have, you need to install either Visual Studio Express or Visual Studio Community Edition, and you need to make sure that NPM knows both where your Python installation is and what version of that compiler tool chain you're using. And of course, the errors that you get when you don't do those things right in no way lead you to these instructions. So it's just not a very friendly experience, right? So what can we do about that? Well, I showed you that we build this thing called the Dev Bundle and ship it to every Meteor developer when they run Meteor the first time. So we can do crazy things, like include a minimal Python installation in the Windows Dev Bundle, where it's particularly hard to install the right version of Python. And while it might seem insane to include 20 megabytes worth of Python, the Dev Bundle is already 60 or 70 megabytes to download. So, that's not exactly a drop in the bucket, but if it saves you the headaches of dealing with those configuration problems, then it's probably worth it. Another thing that we can do, since we now have these Meteor npm and Meteor node commands, is just make sure that environment variables like the all caps Python and JIP MSVS version are set appropriately. And so to a large extent, you will never have to think about that. And so those are just two little paper cuts that probably would have lost you a couple of hours apiece if you didn't have the appropriate context for what was going wrong with your app, and we're able, with this integrated solution that we call Meteor, to kind of just make all those things work. You still do have to install a compiler tool chain, but we can also give you the latest versions of Node.js, and this other really cool tool that I hope everyone starts using, Node pre-jip, which is like Node.js, except that it allows the NPM package author to build and pre-publish versions of their package on lots of different platforms with different versions of Node, so that if you install a package that depends on one of these packages, then as long as it's something that the package author anticipated, you will not actually have to have a compiler toolchain. It'll just download it from Amazon S3. So a good example of a package that does this is this Zopfli package. Zopfli is Google's new compression algorithm. And the way that it accomplishes this, in a nutshell, is that it has an install hook that calls node pre-jip install with fallback to build. So it still works as long as you have a compiler toolchain, even if your particular configuration has not been pre-built. So a world in which we get everyone to use node pre-jip is a world in which the last of the major annoyances in getting this story to work just goes away. And then it stops mattering which version of Node you're using, what platform you're on, as long as either Node pre-jip works or you're able to compile on your own machine. OK, so that brings us back to these 3 pull requests. One to upgrade to Node 4, competing with another one to upgrade to Node 5, and another to upgrade to Node 6. And I think, based on what I said earlier, there is some chance that Node 4 will be something that we support in addition to Node 6. But there's very little chance that Node 5 is going to be worth anyone's time. So I'm going to go ahead and preemptively close this pull request. There, I did it live. You can refer to the LTS schedule if you want to know why I did that. All right, let me go back to my presentation. I have one more slide here, which is just that. Yeah, I think ultimately it's going to depend on. Oh yeah, OK. So the question is, why even bother with Node 4? Like, why not just shoot for the moon? And that's really tempting. Node 6 is going to see the most active development. People are going to care the most about their packages working well with it. Another great thing about it is that it supports something like 93% of the ECMAScript 6 standard. So all this effort that we've been doing to compile your code with Babel so that it will run in Node and in the browser, we'll only have to do that for the browser at that point. And that'd be really cool. That would be a half the headache for me. But I think it ultimately depends on Meteor users' appetite for risk. And if it helps you sell the idea of using Meteor to your boss, that it's possible to use a version of Node that's been out in the wild for a long time, then that's a pretty good reason for making it available. Now, my hope is that anything we do to better support Node 4 will also help us better support Node 6, right? So I think the efforts will be cumulative for, at least that's my hope. If it's too divergent, if it's just like supporting 0, 10, and 6, then maybe it won't be worth it. So that's the rationale. Yeah?
Could you explain again why you're including an embedded Python installation?
Yeah, I wish this wasn't the case, but Nodejs, that tool that helps you build native modules, is written in Python. It's like a tool for like JavaScript. It's used widely by literally every binary NPM package, and yet it's written in Python. And I would understand if it was, say, written in C++, because that's what V8 is written in. But really strange that it's written in Python. I guess chalk it up to someone just being much more familiar with Python than. I mean, that's not true. Nate is not more familiar with Python than he is with JavaScript. So I don't really have an explanation for that.
Pre-existing system that exists.
Yeah?
JIP exists.
Oh, OK. So Node JIP is like a port of JIP to Node. OK.
A wrapper.
There you go. Yeah. So as long as that's the case, you need to have Python. And maybe it's not too much to ask people to install their own version of Python. But that's, you're trying to write JavaScript if you're using Meteor. So it seems like sort of a strange ask. Yeah.
Hey, my question is this on? It's probably on. What benefits do I get as a developer from upgrading to Node 6 at all? Like, I've been using Meteor with Node 0.10, and like, no bad things have happened, other than you not having to transpile stuff. What do I actually get out of it?
Right. I guess I did spin that as a benefit to like me personally, and not to Meteor users. So, I mean, the most recent versions of Node are where all of the effort is being focused on performance and security and compatibility with NPM and other systems. Although Node 0.10 was and is long-term supported, that long-term is coming to an end. So it will, in October, enter maintenance mode, at which point they won't be doing anything other than security fixes for it. And that's not a situation that we want to be in or that we want Meteor developers to be in. So it's actually pretty important that Meteor not be using an ancient version of Node. But day to day, what it will mean is that rebuild times will be faster because we're doing less compilation, and the underlying engine is just faster. The debugging experience will be better because more things will be natively supported, like classes and modules. And so I think it'll be, pretty sure it'll be a strictly better experience any way you cut it.
And we got a couple questions from Twitter. So Martin asked, will packages need to be pre-compiled for Linux if developing on Mac when running Meteor build, for example, Phantom.js?
Right. So there's sort of two sides to this coin. There's Meteor add or Meteor npm install, where you're downloading a package and might need to recompile it for your platform in order to get it to work. The other side of the coin is when you're deploying an app. When you run Meteor build or Meteor deploy, we do a similar thing, where on the target architecture, when you deploy before you're about to run your app, say it's on Galaxy, we run the same npm rebuild command for any binary dependencies. So it's pretty seamless. And whereas you used to have to sort of cross-compile if you were deploying to a different architecture, now you basically don't have to think about that. So the answer is yes, you do have to recompile, but it's done for you.
Great. And then I think you touched on this a little bit about build time improvements. I guess Scott was asking this question. How much more of an improvement do you expect? That's a good question. I think it'll be the most dramatic for like the first build, when you haven't compiled any of your code before, and it's the first time that Babel is seeing it. If we actually succeed in just not having to do nearly as much of that work, then that's several seconds at least of build time that go away. On incremental rebuilds, the difference will be less pronounced, but hopefully the underlying performance of Node will also be noticeable, the improvement. Tailwind, great.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience here? Great, once again,
Yeah.
one more. Yeah, so the question was running JavaScript on embedded devices, and then Ben mentioned, I think, Raspberry Pi, and you were curious about other environments.
Yeah. So Raspberry Pi is an ARM CPU. iPhones are also ARM CPUs. Lots of smaller, lower power devices are based on that architecture. And there is currently a fork of Meteor that works on ARM. And I think the people who have been working on that will be very glad to hear that like the effort involved in that, like the turnaround after we do a release and they like do a subsequent release should be much shorter. But why would you want to do that? Like why would you want to run a Meteor app on a like lower powered device like a Raspberry Pi, which is a tiny credit card sized computer? Well, the great thing about those devices, it's very easy to hook up sensors and actuators, like motors to them. So, imagine you have like an indoor like farming situation, and like you're measuring like temperatures and like moisture levels for whatever reason, turning the lights on and off, and you just want to have like a really responsive app for keeping track of that whole operation. Could imagine Meteor running on those devices, pushing that data to you, being a really good solution for something like that, as an example.
You want cryptography with that? I was thinking.
Yeah, DDP goes both directions. So, like, not only could you, potentially run a Meteor server on a little Raspberry Pi and, connect to it with your phone over Wi-Fi or something like that, but the Raspberry Pi could be the DDP client and be listening for like instructions from a server over DDP. And yeah, you get even fancier with like a mesh network of intercommunicating devices. I think that would be really cool.
Great. With that, thank you, Ben. I know you have a plane to catch. Hopefully we'll see you soon in San Francisco.
Thanks.